Well, again, thank you both for being here. Cary, if you could start off and introduce yourself and say why you're running.
Sure. Yeah. And again, thanks for the opportunity. So Cary Schneider, I am here at Bend resident, lifelong Oregonian, proud parent of 4 adult kids at this point, 2 over in the Valley, 2 down in Southern California. I'm a small business owner, have been for much of the last 18 years. Also currently in this position as an incumbent for the Bend Parks and Rec position 4 after being appointed to that role about a year ago. Previous to that, served on the Bend Park and Rec Budget Committee for a couple of years. Also been on many other nonprofit and for-profit boards over the years, everything from youth sports to business advisory councils. Also been in volunteer roles with pet organizations, senior services, etc. So also a big outdoor advocate, hiker, biker, runner. Actually just did a marathon this weekend, so not moving around so well at the moment. But I am really in this role primarily just because I have such an appreciation for what we have here in Central Oregon with the outdoors and the recreational opportunities we have. And I really want to do my part to ensure those remain for us, not only here, but for future generations to come.
Great, thank you. Austin, why don't you go?
Again, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Austin Mazzolini. I'm a relatively new Bend resident, been here for just over a year. But before moving to Bend, I grew up in Los Angeles, and then after that, spent about 7 years in College Station, Texas. So I went from big city California to small town Texas. And the thing is, these 2 cities have really the same challenges, which is an unending city sprawl, housing going through the roof, and infrastructure bills that don't match the income for the tax coming in. And so I worked on the College Station Parks and Rec Board before moving to Bend, and I saw where a lot of these problems stem from. I saw the good in the Parks and Rec Board, but I also saw a lot of the failings in terms of always bending the knee to the developer and not really working with the issues that the citizens had, like ADA compliance was a thing that constantly was met by the bare minimum. So I saw the failings that happened in College Station. I looked for cities that really cared and valued the recreational opportunities, their environment. So I found Bend, moved here, loved what the city council was doing, loved what local advocacy groups in Bend were doing. I'm a part of Bend Gibby, the Bend Bikes groups. And so I'm involved in Bend, and I want to do more to help Bend grow, especially in this catalyst period that it's in.
Right, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so we'll just take turns who goes first, and we'll start with Austin for this one. You touched on it a little bit, and sometimes we'll repeat things that you said, but what's the role of a park board member, and how do you see yourself contributing to that?
So the role of a park board member, first and foremost, I mean, it's in the name. It's the ecological, the sustainability, the parks aspect of it. And there's also the recreation. As Cary's well aware, Parks and Rec is one of the largest provider of after-school childcare. Parks and Rec provides a ton of opportunities and classes through its program. So it's the Parks and Board member to take what currently exists, what people really love, and to support those activities, those parks, but then also seeing where Bend is changing in terms of its development practices, in terms of its population, in terms of its demographics, seeing what local advocacy groups are fighting for, see what city council is aiming for in the next 5-10 years, and applying what people will want to see change and balancing out with what currently exists, and just having that conversation and working with every group we can, from small to the council to everything in between.
Thanks. I can repeat the question if you'd like, Cary.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah, what's the role of a park board member, and how do you see yourself filling that role?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, definitely several roles, and I think Austin touched on some of those very well. But I think first is making sure that we're recognizing the needs of all the stakeholders in the community and listening, and not just having our own necessarily our agenda. and taking that information and, focusing on several aspects. One is, because most of our revenue comes from tax base, making sure we're maximizing those tax dollars. I'll probably get into this later, as we talk maybe about some of the needs and if we get to that, but making sure that we are taking care of what we have, but also projecting and making sure we can allocate funds for future needs, for any growth and, potentially evolving needs of our community as well. At the same time, while we don't take a day-to-day role in the operations of Bend Parks and Rec, we do oversee the executive director, and we want to make sure that that individual is executing at a high level. We are, of course, also responsible for kind of the strategic direction of the organization and setting policy. And I'm very proud of, Bend Parks and Rec, not only during my time and just over the past year in this role, but, it's an award-winning organization. I moved here in large part because of the park system, and I think much of our community did for, parks or just the greater outdoors. And so I think we're on the right path, but there is some challenges we're facing fiscally as well as with the growth that we're facing as well.
Okay, thank you. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges for Bend Park and Rec right now? Cary, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, really two or three, and one of them is kind of evolving, but the big one I see is allocating the funds we have coming in and really optimizing the use. And again, I just referenced briefly, but taking care of what we have, and we have a lot of incredible assets, but these assets are aging and they are expensive to maintain. And so we have a very deliberate, methodical process of doing what's called a capital improvement plan that we update every year. It's a 5-year plan. And we have about 80 million allocated just for either improvements or expansion in that, including 35 million that anticipates going to get approved July 1st for this coming year, strictly just for expansion and reinvestment in the assets we have. At the same time, we have to take into account the growth. We need additional trail capacity, trail connectivity. We need some additional facility expansion. The biggest need we see in the surveys that we send out are, more class capacity, more other services. Soft trails are by far our greatest need as far as in desire within the community. And so continuing to also try to stay ahead of that as well. So that's a big one. The second one is making sure that we've got accessibility for our entire community, and, focusing on an underserved part of that. I think we're very strategic in doing that and identifying specific park search areas. We've also incorporated in a equity map about 4 years ago to look for areas that are underserved, whether it's based on geography, financial barriers, language or culture barriers, and trying to identify ways to better serve that population. Also doing an effort with outreach, really a huge focus to make sure that everybody in the community has the same access that we do to all these resources. The third one, and I'll just be real quick, the one that's evolving is the climate change and how that's impacting us. Everything from wildfire exposure. We have several natural resource areas that are hazards, not only for ourselves as an asset, but for our partners in our neighborhoods that we're now having to invest financial resources in to mitigate. And then things just like smoke that are now impacting our classes and summer camps. And so we have those to address as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Austin.
You're going to hear from me a very similar answer to what Cary had, because I believe exactly those same things. I do want to touch on the financial aspect of it. One of the things that makes Bend Parks and Rec so great is their commitment to the idea that every resident will have a park within roughly a half mile. And I strongly believe in that goal. But one of the issues we're seeing is as Bend is growing, it is literally growing outwards and sprawling. We have urban growth boundaries that are taking more land into the city. We have the Ponderosa project, housing development, where Bend annexed more land. And so we're seeing a shift towards, or not so much a shift, but a continuation of this expansion. And it's Parks and Rec's duty to work with the city of Bend to make sure that when we expand so in a way that brings more density. Because if we add a whole new neighborhood and add 400 homes, the equation of whether or not buying the land and supporting a park for those 400 homes is very different when that home number is 4,000. So part of the tax revenue equation is making sure, okay, where's the density and how can we support density? Because urban sprawl will take a huge financial toll, both from the city, but also from the Park and Rec Department. One aspect that Cary touched on very nicely was the climate change and the fire risks. As Bend gets drier and drier and gets less snow over time, the fire risk just increases exponentially. And so Parks and Rec needs to do a good job being the caretaker for all of our dry woodscapes. And then the last thing I would say is changing resident needs and desires, not so much in the park system themselves, because BPRD has done a really great job of creating and maintaining high quality parks, but more and less how those park systems interact within our daily lives. So one example is connecting our park system and our trail network to the city trail network. The city is spending, I'm pretty sure, billions of dollars updating our road network system. Well, Parks and Rec has the safest and most isolated trail network in the city. And so how can Park and Rec utilize that with the city to make it so that people can get from point A to B, can get to work safely while enjoying the outdoor recreational space almost by accident. But yeah, to summarize, I think Cary and I are very aligned on kind of the challenges that Parks and Rec is facing.
Thank you.
Okay, what concerns have you heard from constituents in your district, and what would you do to address those issues? Let's start with Austin.
Yeah, absolutely. The concerns I'm hearing, being a part of the Bend Yimby group and Bend Bikes, I do want to point out my own biases that I'm hearing a lot of the talking points I'm explaining here, which is building for density, being smart with our tax dollars, but also an issue that Oregon is facing in general is just high taxation in general. Now, I am a supporter of taxes, but we need to make sure we leverage them appropriately. A lot of that goes back to the density discussion. If we're going to spend $10 million on a new park, is it wise to spend that money on something that very few people will leverage, or is it better to spend that money on programs that are more accessible to low-income individuals and that kind of equation? So a lot of the dialogue is mainly around not so much how much money is raised, but how the money is being spent, and just being a good steward of those tax dollars, because BPRD is in a fantastic position with such a large budget to make such a positive impact in the community.
Okay, Cary, would you like me to repeat the question?
Would you please?
Okay, what concerns have you heard from constituents in the district, and what would you do to address those issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think a few things that have come out both just informally in conversations, as well as maybe some of the more formal efforts as far as surveys that are sent out. One is, we have a very active population, obviously a growing population. That's great, but our facilities are starting to reach capacity in many cases as far as classes and trail congestion and so forth. And so the need to continue to expand that. At the same time, affordability is also at the top of the list, and making sure that we don't price ourselves out and try to be as cost effective as possible, and again be good fiduciary responsibility of our funds as a tax district. So a balance of more capacity, not only in facilities and resources and classes, and even discussion of eventually a West Side type of recreation similar to Juniper or Larkspur, but also additional trail capacity, connectivity, of course, at the south and the north ends, as well as working our way east on the canal trails, and continuing to be successful in those efforts as well.
Thank you both. Cary, I think we're starting with you with this one. We have a fairly new park director. How do you see yourself evaluating her performance? What is the process, and what's your role as a board member?
Yeah, great question. Very timely. We're actually starting that process right now. So just getting that, we just got some paperwork on kind of what that executive director evaluation process is going to look like. But as I referenced at the start, I see that as actually one of my primary goal or responsibilities besides, strategic oversight and philosophical type stuff is making sure the right person's in that role, making sure they have the resources and support they need to be successful, and then evaluating them based on having that resource and support. So that is both an individual evaluation that each of the 5 board members do, on their own, but then also a collaborative process that takes place over the next, roughly 60 days at this point with the July 1st effective date. I think that's important that we have a transparent and very blunt conversation. And I feel like we've built that working relationship. She was obviously part of Ben Park and Rec in a previous role before that. So I had a chance to build a very good professional relationship with her, but making sure she's got the resources she needs. That's a two-way conversation, of course, so that she can be effective in that role, but at the same time, getting an opportunity to gain some constructive feedback to not only benefit herself, but the community as a whole going forward.
Okay, thank you. Austin, do you want me to repeat the question or you got it?
Yes, please, can you repeat it?
Yeah. We have a fairly new park director. What do you see as your role in evaluating her performance, and what are you looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. Truly, I think the role of evaluating the executive director's performance really falls onto the individuals who use Parks and Rec services the most. And so my answer to that would be it really comes down to utilization and survey responses. How are people seeing the trajectory Parks and Rec is going towards? How are they seeing their park access and their recreational access? So I know Parks and Rec is working on this project currently, which is to track how many people are using different parks daily. And so it's really the executive director's job to satisfy the constituents first and foremost. And so it's really up to them hearing their grievances, hearing their responses and surveys, seeing the hours spent at these locations and seeing how it's trending up or down, seeing how I'll just really cut it off there. Evaluating the constituents, hearing their grievances, and then using that as the guiding force to judge the executive director's performance.
Thank you.
Thanks. So you guys have mentioned affordability a little bit. I want to put it in the context of affordable housing. So we'll start with Austin on this one. What's your take on the notion of waiving system development charges for things like affordable housing projects?
I support the idea of waiving these park fees in order to support housing development, but I think BPRD can do a better job of working with the city government to push more for the goals that we're looking for. So affordable housing, increased density, commercial zoning in tangent with single family zoning and that type of thing. If you look at the new development maps for a lot of these proposed areas that are still being built out, you'll see they do have affordable housing and they do have higher density, but not at the percentages that I think the city needs. So for example, it would be 80+% single family zoning, 5 to 10% medium, and then 5% high density if you're lucky. And so I fully support waiving system development charges to increase to support these types of housing that's not as commercially profitable. But at the same time, it's our goal and the city's goal to make sure that if we are waiving these charges, we're not waiving it for 5% change year over year. We're waiving it for hopefully 20, 30% in order to get more housing built and at a lower cost.
I just want to make sure I understand when you mean the percentages, like in terms of units per acre or something to that effect. That's what you mean?
Yeah,
Okay,
mainly
yeah.
land usage. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. All right. Cary, would you like a repeat of that question?
Please, if you would.
Yeah, we've been talking about affordability a little bit. I wanted to know what your take on waiving system development charges for things like affordable housing projects.
Yeah, very, very important and very complex topic, honestly, I think, because, it's not our core mission as a Parks and Rec district. We have dedicated funding, for the purposes of Parks and Rec. With that said, I am proud, I think we've allocated over 4.3 million towards affordability housing contracts the last 5 years. We just approved up to another 300 units over the next 4 years that could come in between about, I think, 2.3 to 3.4 million in SDC waivers. I don't take that lightly at all. In fact, it's been something that honestly has forced me to deliberate a lot over the last several months. And not only because it's a core focus, but I recognize that the affordable housing issue is a much broader impact on our community. And sometimes there may be times where those funds are better allocated for that, for the greater good of our community. And that's how I've reconciled that in these decisions over the last several months. I do think it has to be a thoughtful approach, definitely not a blanket approach, recognizing the economic environment we're in, recognizing our core mission and making sure we can still meet our level of service goals, both for existing capacity and also still have the funds to dedicate for future growth, as we talked about earlier. So proud of what we've done, obviously proud of our recent decision to allocate additional funds and be great partners with the city, but don't take that lightly as well.
Thanks.
We're going to switch to water now, which is a major issue for the Deschutes Basin. Is there any change to the way the district uses water or how it waters its parks that you would support? And I've lost track of who goes first, so I'm going to start with Austin.
That's a great question. I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with the water issue as it relates to the specifics. So my answer would be to the same as it would be to anything that I am woefully undereducated on, which is, okay, who is the expert in this field? What are the metrics that we are currently at? What are the metrics that we need? And being open to learning about the process and what changes financially we need to make in order to support it. So my general philosophy when it comes to anything revolving the climate sustainability is the top priority because it affects everyone. If we don't, to take a slight tangent, if for example we don't invest in fire prevention mechanisms, that has a huge tangible cost to the entire the city. And so water resources is the same thing. I will need to get more educated on that.
All right, Cary.
Yeah, I mean, water scarcity obviously is a big issue for the whole Central Oregon area, right? We're seeing that all over the news in every aspect. And Bend Park and Rec is no different than that. And somewhat ironic you brought that up because I was just having a conversation. It's probably been 3 or 4 weeks ago now with the Parks and Natural Resources Director within Bend Parks and Rec, talking to her about what are we doing to try to mitigate our water usage, because there's a balance, right? Part of Parks and Rec is providing green grass for people to recreate on. At the same time, we want to do our part to be good stewards of this this asset that's non-renewable in many ways. And so being very thoughtful, strategic. When we are building out new parks, you're seeing a lot more natural landscape, I think, as part of that, to be very thoughtful and stewards of that resource. At the same time, balancing the green. One of the things they've done relatively recently is working with the city of Bend and making sure that they're being as efficient as possible with water usage for things like watering and times of the day, the amount used, measuring, just really being ideally as optimal with that. So it is a priority for them in doing that, in minimizing the acreage that needs to be irrigated, as an example, and then otherwise using natural landscape whenever possible as well. And that also goes back to the climate discussion I brought up much earlier. That obviously plays a part in that as well.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? When you had that discussion with the resources director, what was the answer that they gave you to that question?
Yeah, that was part of it. Is I just wanted to know, what are we doing? Because that has come up, the question earlier about some of the feedback I get from constituents, that does come up as well, and rightfully so. And in my neighborhood as well, we're all trying to be smarter with our use of water. And so we had that conversation in as far as how are we being most efficient with our irrigation practices? What are we doing with the design? And much of what I just recapped was really, in many ways, kind of regurgitating what she told me as I was trying to get educated on that. To Austin's point earlier, that's not something that I came into this a year ago having great knowledge of as well. So I did want to get up to speed on that.
Thanks.
Bet.
Okay, owners with off-leash dogs can create park user dog conflicts in Bend parks. Sometimes those conflicts are dangerous to both dogs and humans. What can be done to ensure park user safety? And on that note, do you think we have enough fenced-in off-leash dog parks? We'll start with you, Cary.
Yeah, I mean, we've made the investment in 9 off-leash dog parks around the city, and obviously there's areas outside of the city as well that people like to recreate their dogs, like Good Dog. And so I do feel like there are ample resources for that. And I am a huge dog lover. I've had dogs all my life. My dog was not necessarily one, my last one, that I felt comfortable leaving off leash. She could be a little bit naughty at times. So I do think we do that. I think it's an education thing. I would love to, say that everybody follows those rules. Obviously, that's not the case. We've seen some of the recent news articles. That's another common complaint, the parks get, and I observe personally when I'm out in our trails as well. So I do think it's an education thing. I think it's a little bit of a peer pressure thing where people will start to hopefully get the idea that they maybe should try to be helpful for others. It's not necessarily that their dog is, of course, a dog that can be aggressive, but some people have obviously inherent dangers or for good reasons, or their dogs may also have those reasons. So it's just about being respectful to the rest of the community as well.
Okay, and Austin, would you like me to repeat the question? Yeah. Sure. Okay. Owners with off-leash dogs create park user dog conflicts, and sometimes they can be dangerous to both humans and dogs. What can be done to ensure safety? And on that note, do you think we have enough fenced-in off-leash dog parks?
I want to answer that last question first. Do we have enough off-leash dog parks? I think the answer is yes. We can always have more. But I guess the broader issue is a lot of the most valuable places people want to be, like the river trail, aren't fenced in. And so people are going to take their dogs to the river trail, whether or not we have 9 fenced in park locations or 100. And so while we could always strive for more, I think the number we have is satisfactory. As it relates to potentially dangerous off-leash dogs and the interactions with people, I love Cary's point about education. That's always a big one. Posting signs saying and making it very clear to individuals walking their dogs that, hey, this is an on-leash zone, especially in areas that we know people will historically bring off-leash dogs. Another part is honestly certification for off-leash dogs. Some dogs are trained to be off-leash. Some dogs have that skill set. I don't know if it isn't in the best interest of the county to support that program in terms of like creating one, but if there's one we can work with, that probably would be great. If your dog truly is off leash trained, having a certification like a lot of service dogs have may be one way to satisfy that need. And then another thing is reporting, maybe not necessarily to the police for an off leash dog that hasn't done anything wrong yet, but reporting it to the city so that the city can be aware, or reporting it to Parks and Rec through a phone number or a survey saying, hey, there's a high population of off-leash dogs here. This makes using this park or trail or what have you less comfortable. Can we do something? Can we add a sign? That kind of thing.
Just have a quick follow-up question to what you said about off-leash dogs certification. Like, is that a program in the city I'm not aware of, or is that a state thing? And then in an off-leash, in an on-leash park area, would that off-leash certified dog be able to be off leash. I mean, I don't.
Be like TSA pre.
Okay.
So as far as I know, there's no certification program with the city or Oregon, more broadly. But I guess my point is, service dogs exist, and there are training programs that can get your dog off leash certified. And especially as you leave the city limits of Bend Parks and Rec, I know a lot of national parks and forests and state parks are all on leash, but the reality is people will take their dogs off leash. So the idea is, I guess, having a formalized way to allow this behavior is better than to just tiptoe around it, if that makes sense. If you're going to have an off-leash designation, or if every dog needs to be on leash, that's fine, but you need to be very clear on that effort. You can't do this. It's your dog should be on leash, but we're not going to really enforce it. We're not going to put the signage up, that kind of thing.
Austin, I'm going to come back to you for this one. What sets you apart from your opponent?
That's a great question. I think, again, Cary and I aligned on a lot of things, and from everything I've heard about Cary from other people, he's a great guy and he's good at his job. I think the main thing that sets us apart isn't so much where we fall on a lot of topics. I'm sure there's definitely nuance there, but one big thing that is a criticism of Bend Parks and Rec is the demographic representation. A significant amount moving to Bend fall in roughly my demographics, which is 20s to 30s moving to Bend because they love what Bend offers and they want to support Bend, and also looking to start families, looking for opportunity, that kind of thing. And so that is a need in the community, in the board, that I think I would fit very well. Understanding as a newer Bend resident, what are the things that we cherish about Bend so much that we want to support as much as we can, rather than a lot of individuals who have been here for a long time and want Bend to remain a very small mountain town. Yeah.
That's awesome. Cary, what sets you apart from your opponent?
Yeah, and I've had a chance to get to know Austin a little bit the last few weeks. We got to go on a tour together and think a lot of Austin and appreciate him being a part of this. I think that makes everybody better, giving us a chance to look at ourselves and make sure we're doing the best we can for our community. I think the things that might make me more appealing is just the experience I have. I've been fortunate to be in this role over a year now. I've had a chance to gain some awareness and understand the issues that we're facing, and just as importantly, understand what those potential solutions are to address those. I've also had a chance to build a relationship, as you mentioned, with a relatively new executive director that should hopefully lead to some further production there, as well as collaborate with many different groups of stakeholders over the last years on many different issues, some that we've talked about, some that we haven't, such as like the Southern Bridge crossing area. So I think that's huge. And, spending a couple of years before that on the budget committee and really investing myself in this to bring, my best to the table with this position. Also being a business owner and have been now for the last 18 years, I do think I bring a relatively unique skill set to this position that, the rest of the board or majority of the board doesn't necessarily bring. And so bringing that nice different perspective from that business acumen, having to be successful in collaborating with a lot of different stakeholders for my own personal financial success as a business owner, I think is a skill that's critical there. And so I think those are two big things, the passion I have, of course, for the role. And also, as I mentioned here, I've lived, I grew up in Eugene. I lived much of my life in the Salem area, but I lived here back in the 80s when I got out of high school. I had a chance to live here there. I actually worked at the old, what was then the Roberson Ford dealership, detailing cars. And then, being back here now. So I've got an appreciation of what we have, but I've also had a chance to see other parts of the state and how we can improve on that here locally. So thank you for that question.
I'm glad that you brought up the Southern Bridge crossing. I'd love to just touch on that briefly with each of you. Cary, you first. Just asking, what is your take on the Southern Bridge crossing? Do you support it?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I do think, we need more capacity. We need greater trail density or trail mileage. We need that connectivity. We've got Forest Service land out here. So I am very much in favor of trying to identify a viable solution to get us there. And as you may know, we did give direction to our staff back in, I think, February to look for some viable alternatives, given that this has obviously been something on the table now for many years, unsuccessfully being accomplished. So I'm very much supportive of trying to identify a viable solution. I don't know what that is yet. That's why we're making that investment in making a financial investment of time and resources to try to figure that out. I'm very hopeful that we can find an amicable solution that allows us to do that.
Thank you. Austin, what about you?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, just wanted to know what your take is on the Southern Bridge crossing proposal and if that's something that you'd support as a board member.
Pedestrian bridge, or is this?
Yeah, the pedestrian bridge that has been talked about for over a dozen years and keeps hitting roadblocks.
I apologize one more time. So we're talking about the Hawthorne Bridge. Can you repeat the question?
Not the Hawthorne Bridge. This would be a pedestrian bridge that would cross the Deschutes River on the southern side of town.
Gotcha. I mean, I fully support pedestrian crossings. It's actually one of the things I think Bend is at its weakest in. We have bridge crossings for cars all over the place. Specifically, the one I personally talk about all the time is the historic canal trail that connects so many neighborhoods. But when you look at the number of pedestrian bridges that connect to that trail, you can have an apartment complex where 500 plus people can live there. You can have the historic canal trail right next to it, literally within 500 feet. But the closest connection point to that trail is miles away. And so my take on pedestrian bridges in general is we need more of them, and we need to encourage people to use pedestrian bridges as an efficient means of transportation quite heavily. So we make multi-million-dollar investments in bridges, for car bridges, all the time. It is a fraction of the cost to build one for a pedestrian bridge, and for the cost of one car bridge, you could have 3, 4, 5 of these pedestrian bridges. So in my mind, I share Cary's thoughts about the fiscal responsibility of it, seeing what the different solutions are, and coming to the best one. But I wholeheartedly support the adding of these pedestrian bridges in as many places as we can, because otherwise the city becomes very disconnected when you're riding in anything but a car.
Thank you.
Well, that concludes our round of questions. I'd like to give you guys a chance to take 2 minutes for this next response, touch on anything that we might have missed, and again, reiterate why you want this position. Let's go ahead and start with Austin.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, so to reiterate some of the talking points I had before, the reason I want this position, and the reason I think I would do a good job at it, is because I bring a wholly unique perspective to the board that is not currently being filled. A lot of the board members are very experienced with Parks and Rec, and they're extremely experienced in Oregon, and that's wonderful. But having lived in one of the biggest cities in the world, having lived in one of the smallest ones, in red state, blue state, seeing what works is a very factual, tangible process. And it has nothing to do with party lines. Both party lines can do good, both party lines can do a pretty poor job. And so as a perspective, I also worked again on the College Station Parks and Rec board, so I do have that experience. I do understand what it means to be a member on the board, hearing resident issues, and then delegating on those issues. The second point was the demographics, which I touched on, and then the last point is really the community involvement. I'm heavily involved in different organizations. I mean, just yesterday I was at the Planning Commission speaking there about a change in the development code to support more assisted dwelling units on housing to increase density. So I'm very active and on the pulse for what changes Bend is going through and what people are fighting for more than just Parks and Rec. And Parks and Rec is one huge critical portion that can help in so much of Bend's development. So there's a couple of different reasons, but all of it wraps up into I want to support Bend. I want to support it, be the best city it can be, and not fall into the traps that so many cities have fallen into, where it's insolvent. They deprioritize parks and recreation for other for cost-saving measures. Yeah, that about sums it up.
Thank you, Austin. Cary, what did we miss? And give us a little bit about why you're the right person for the position.
Yeah, and I think we hit a lot of the big topics. I mean, when I look at, I'm proud of what we've accomplished. I've again only been in this position for a little bit over a year, but I feel like, in that period of time, we've made some great strides with trail connectivity, as well as expansion. We've also, shown great discipline with fiscally with a balanced budget, despite the challenges we're facing with increased costs on construction and challenges with staff and so forth. So very proud of what we've accomplished in that relatively short period, but we still have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do on accessibility, inclusivity, making sure that we're addressing residents right now that may be underserved and really focusing on that effort. We've got additional trail capacity and expansion that's critical, but at the same time, as I referenced earlier, we've got some fiscal challenges and responsibilities in making sure that we've got sufficient funds to address some of our existing projects. And some things we didn't talk about but are going to be very significant from a fiscal perspective is we have some large expenses coming up. We've got the old Bend Gym, which is going to have some significant repair work being done. We've got some maintenance that'll be significant maintenance likely to be done to the Whitewater Park. We have a new West Side location, a facility that we need to eventually build out for capacity. And so really trying to balance all those is critical. I think I bring that skill set and that experience, both from a business ownership perspective, but also a proven record being on many boards as well as this board, and also the budget discipline as well. So I feel like I'm the right person for that opportunity at this time.
Thank you both. That concludes our time together. I really appreciate you guys again setting some time aside to speak with us, allowing us to ask you these questions and then capture this on video and present it to our readers and now watchers. Again, a big thank you to both of you for putting yourself out there and being willing to take on the slings and arrows of outrageous social media commentary. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for the time and the opportunity, you guys as well.
Yep.
Take care.
Had a great
Thank you,
conversation.
Austin.
Have a great day. Yeah.
Thank you.